Thanks, Jillian. Fox News alert, fairness is overrated. Those words from a top network news anchor accepting a journalism award Tuesday night. NBC nightly news anchor Lester Holt at the 45th Edward R. Murrow Symposium saying reporters don't necessarily need to hear both sides of a story before determining the, quote, truth, and warning that the media should stop giving a platform to what he considers misinformation. They say Holt was essentially signaling liberal reporters to cover the news from a one-sided perspective. He spoke the night before. Molly Hemingway published a scathing editorial in The Federalist. She writes, average Americans need to stop reading and watching the corrupt corporate media. They should immediately stop subscribing to them, stop advertising with them, and stop paying attention to them. Reporters at these outlets quite obviously hate many Americans and the values they hold, and it's time most Americans realized that and acted appropriately in response. You are watching Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno, and here today, Fox News correspondent Jillian Turner, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, syndicated radio host and Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, and in the virtual center seat, the one and only Tucker Carlson, host of the new Fox Nation series Tucker Carlson Today, and also host of Tucker Carlson Tonight on Fox News Channel. Welcome to you all. I'm so excited for today. We're going to have such a great show. So, Leslie, your thoughts on what Lisa was saying about redefining things, on the argument over semantics that leaves the concepts then left to the wolves?
Well, a few things. When it comes to the truth, journalists are supposed to report the facts. I said numerous times here on Fox that I'm no longer a journalist. I was many years ago as a talk show host and a contributor here at Fox. I opine, which is very different than reporting the facts. 2 + 2 is 4. But how do we arrive at 2 + 2 is 4? Is it wrong to cover theories where people thought 2 + 2 is 3 or 5? Listen, years ago in my talk radio career, there are many times I got slammed. And I remember one time in particular when I interviewed the Grand Wizard of the KKK. And what people said was, Leslie, why did you give him a platform? And one of the reasons I gave him the platform is because when I thought when people heard the interview, they would come away with the hatred and ignorance that he had, and it wouldn't help the KKK's numbers, but there were some people that thought that was completely contrary, and there would be a different outcome at the end of the interview. You need to report everything, but you have to report the facts. What I think Lester Holt might have been getting to, and what I think he could have said in a different or perhaps better way, is that if we as members of the media, because we all are members of the media, continue to perpetrate information or myths that can lead to something deadly, for example, massive fraud, election was stolen, that led to perhaps some of the reporting, the events that came about on January 6th, well, then that is dangerous. But you have to hear all sides. And when I first started, there was the fairness doctrine, and you had to because you were forced to.
Welcome back. Fox News alert for you. The U.S. Border Patrol releasing this shocking new video from a remote area in New Mexico. Smugglers sitting atop a 14-foot border wall, dropping 2 young girls, aged 3 and 5, over the barrier, leaving them to fend for themselves in the desert. The smugglers then took off. Those girls from Ecuador are now safe in U.S. custody. But despite images like that and the poor conditions at crowded migrant facilities, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez claims this is not a, quote, border crisis, and says we need to make up for the actions of the previous administration. Leslie, Senator Ted Cruz responded to the Congresswoman over Twitter, and we'll just read that for you right here. We'll get your response to it. Every word of this is false, he wrote. It is a Biden border crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a health crisis. It's a national security crisis. And Dems are desperately trying to cover it up. They are gaslighting you. Leslie, your thoughts?
Well, if it's a Biden border crisis now, why wasn't Senator Cruz calling it a Trump border crisis then? And he didn't. Democrats do this. Republicans do this. And by the way, Ted Cruz and AOC, there's no love lost between them. AOC could walk on water, and Ted Cruz would say, well, the tide was really low. Let's be honest. I would agree with one thing Tucker said. Yes, once in a blue moon, the moon will be blue tonight. And that is that this is a big problem. Immigration is a problem. We've had migrants coming to our border, drug cartels coming through our borders for 17 years. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican, this has been very difficult to get under control because you need a massive, comprehensive, multifaceted immigration package and legislation that needs bipartisan support. And whether it's a Democrat or Republican in office, in the House, in the Senate with a majority, or in the White House, it gets kicked down the road. And it can't continue to get kicked down the road. But I do want to point something out with regard to race. 91% increase last year of illegal immigrants coming over the Canadian border. Did anybody know that? I didn't know that till I looked it up. Did anybody hear about that? We do have to question why. Who was coming in Canada, our northern border, versus who was coming in Mexico, our southern border. And one big difference is their skin color.
President Biden's throwing his support behind moving Major League Baseball's All-Star Game out of Atlanta to protest Georgia's new election law. Biden's also claiming the new law does this. Well, the Washington Post says this. They're giving Biden 4 Pinocchios, their harshest rating for misinformation. They say the law does provide water for voters who are waiting in lines, just not from political pollsters, that it keeps polls open later than 5 p.m. on Election Day, and that there's no evidence it restricts working class voters. Leslie, Lisa hits on a particular there that's actually quite important, which is that one of the things this Georgia election don't tell me what I said.
I like to hear that. Can we just play that on a loop?
One of the things that this Georgia election law does do is add some Saturdays into the mix for early voting that weren't there before. So I think it's kind of hard to make the argument on either side of the aisle here that this bill is a monolith, that it's all racist or that it's all something else. You know, there's restrictions included in there, which Democrats would see as the voter ID component. And then there's also expansions, like expanded access to early voting on the weekends, right?
Yeah, but listen, the majority of people in our country who work a 6-day week are more of the poorer segment of our country. They're not the wealthy. And most of those people are people of color, especially in the state of Georgia. So they're not going to be able to take off of work to work on a Saturday. So let's look at access, okay? Let's look at the ballot boxes. Look at the map. I didn't make it. Georgia did, as to where the ballot boxes are being removed and where they're being added. And there is definitely areas in the state of Georgia where there are predominantly people of color, even more specifically African Americans. And with regard to ID, you know, homeless people don't have an ID and they have a right to vote. Some elderly people don't have an ID. They have a right to vote. And certainly some poor segments of our population don't have IDs because many of them don't drive. They use public transportation. And look, you had Republicans make the Georgia laws. There is no evidence of massive fraud in the state of Georgia. It's only after a black Democrat became a senator, a Jewish Democrat became a senator, and Joe Biden, a Democrat, became president, and Georgia flipped blue, that these laws were changed. I just want to say one last thing because I know we're pressed on time. To Tucker's point, let the voters decide, but I agree. But the voters have a right. Where is the power in voting? Not just voting. You have power in legislation. There are lawsuits against this. And as a consumer. So if people say, look, I don't want to fly Delta. I don't want to drink Coca-Cola products. Or, you know, I don't want to be a part of any kind of sport that is going to be held or watch a movie that's going to be filmed in the state of Georgia. That is their right as well.
Sounds like you're
start
making
your own Delta. Start your own Coca-Cola.
Well, Tucker,
you're a libertarian now. I love it.
But it sounds like what Leslie is saying, Tucker, is that it's the consumers, the customers of Coca-Cola and Delta that should be making the decision. It's still not the big shots, the big wigs at the corporate headquarters. You guys are kind of in agreement a little more than I think you think. Anyway, we got to leave it there.
Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody that we're in agreement a little bit.
We'll come back to you both on the other side. But enough.
A new twist in New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's nursing home scandal. The New York Times now reporting that his top aides worked behind the scenes to hide the number of COVID patients who died in nursing homes while he was negotiating a big money deal for his book, promoting his leadership during the pandemic. The Times also reporting Cuomo had his staffers work on his book, and that may violate state ethics rules. And Leslie, again, the more that we're learning, the more that we realize how many people were involved in the machine that he put into play, and power goes unchecked. Is it better late than never that it's happening now, finally, if that's what we are indeed seeing?
No, absolutely. Rather than somebody getting away with it, look, this is wrong on so many levels. First of all, you have people in the state of New York that were and continue to suffer from the COVID-19 pandemic, people who are sick, people who have buried loved ones, people who lost their businesses, people who lost their jobs. And he's working on, you know, a multi-million-dollar book deal as governor of the state. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Additionally, his aides working on that book. Wrong, wrong, wrong. During this time, because if you have a pandemic, you need all hands on deck helping the government of that state, New York, to run and the people to get through this pandemic, not to be working on chapters and rewrites and drafts of a book. And my question would be, did he ask the staff to do that over their responsibility in their role working for him as aides and really working for the people and supposed to be working for the people of New York?